Chanale, and this is the weekly squeeze breakdown on Moral Edge. So I have relatives who live in Miami who love Israel, like deeply, emotionally, spiritually love Israel. They have a Magen David on their keychain. They give to the IDF. They cried at the last Israel parade, and they will argue with anyone who says a bad word about the Jewish state. They are very proud Jews. And yet they would last approximately 4 days here. Not because they're weak, not because they're not Zionists, but because being a Jew is not the same as being an Israeli. And nobody tells you that clearly enough. And that confusion creates all kinds of problems: political, emotional, cultural, relational. And I think it's time we had a real conversation about it. Because here's the thing. You can be Jewish anywhere. You can light Shabbat candles in suburban Ohio, send your kids to Hebrew school, show up to shul 3 times a year, and feel completely, legitimately, meaningfully Jewish. And that's real. I'm not dismissing it. But Israeliness is something else. It's a whole other operating system. Same heritage, very different software. And today, I want to walk you through what that actually means. Not as a travel brochure, not as a Zionist propagandist, which is cool, not as an apology, but as an honest attempt to describe something that you generally cannot understand until you live here. So buckle up, because we're going somewhere specific today. I know, it's not the Masada. Let's start with the fruit, because if you want to understand Israelis, you have to understand the Sabra. The Sabra is a cactus fruit, the prickly pear, if you will. And it became the nickname for Jews born in Israel. Thorny and tough on the outside, sweet and delicious once you get past the spikes. And Israelis will tell you this about themselves with complete sincerity and zero irony, which in itself is very Israeli. The thing is, it's completely accurate. I've seen Israelis be brutally rude to a stranger in a line in a grocery store and then drop everything, literally everything, to help that same stranger when their car broke down an hour later. The prickliness is not cruelty. It's an armor. It's what you grow when you live in a country that has been at war with its neighbors on and off since the moment it was born in 1948. When existential threat is part of your national origin story, you develop a certain efficiency with pleasantries. But here's the flip side of that armor, the part that people miss. Israelis have an almost irrational love of life because they know how fast it could end. You hear stories of a shooting near a busy restaurant strip in Tel Aviv. 6 people are killed. Terrible. And then a half an hour later, after the ambulances left, people went back to their tables and finished their meals. Not callousness, indomitability. The iron cultural refusal to let fear win the evening. That's Israel. That's the Sabra. You can't understand the warmth without understanding the thorns, and you can't understand the thorns without understanding what grew them. Now let's talk about the language, because I think this is where many diaspora Jews fundamentally misunderstand what Israeli life actually feels like. Modern Hebrew is not ancient Hebrew. I want to be very clear about this. Ancient Hebrew is the language of the Torah, of prayer, of the prophets. It's the language in which God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Modern Hebrew is a language in which someone cuts you off on the Ayalon highway and says things that I can't even repeat on this podcast. And that's the miracle of modern Hebrew. And it's genuinely a miracle. There's never been anything like it in human history. A liturgical language revived as the mother tongue of a modern nation. It took ancient roots and grew them into something completely new. Fast, sarcastic, direct, physically expressive, and slightly aggressive even when you're just ordering coffee. What's interesting is where the borrowed words come from. In American Jewish culture, Yiddish leaked into English. Shlemiel, Shlemazel, Chutzpah. And it became this warm, comedic texture. In Israeli Hebrew, the borrowings are from Arabic. So we have Alan, Yalla, Sababa, Walla. These are Arabic words that secular Israelis use every single day without thinking twice, because the cultures are genuinely intertwined in ways that international conversation about Israel doesn't really capture. And then you meet Israelis abroad. You hear them across a cafe in Paris. You hear them on the subway in New York. Not because they're being rude, they're just being Israeli. The volume, the directness, the accent that somehow sounds like someone's making a point even when they're just ordering a drink. You land in Ben Gurion Airport, and out come these people who walk faster and speak louder and just move through the world, always seeming mildly offended by the slowness of everything around them. This is not a criticism. This is a love letter. Because what you're hearing in that voice, in that cadence, in that slightly too loud conversation about where to eat dinner, is a people who fought very hard for the right to be loud. A people who spent centuries in exile being quiet, being careful, being invisible, and then one day decided, never again. Not just the tragedy part of never again, all of it, including the silence. There's a concept in Israeli culture called the frier. It means sucker. And it's the single greatest social crime you could commit in Israel, to be a frier. This is not a minor cultural quirk. This is a loud, bearing infrastructure. The anti-frier ethic explains Israeli driving, Israeli bargaining, Israeli negotiating, Israeli line behavior, which, let me be very clear, is less of a line and more of a competitive contact sport. You turn your back for 1 second at an ATM machine, and somehow 3 people have appeared between you and your cash. You're not dreaming. You're in Israel. On the road, lanes are conceptual. Merging is an act of faith. Honking is a full vocabulary. Okay, there's a short honk that means the light is green. The medium honk, that means I see you and I'm watching. And the long honk, that is essentially a philosophical statement about the other driver's worth as a human being. And yet, and this is the miracle, everyone is paying attention with this specific Israeli intensity that makes the whole thing somehow function. The bluntness extends to language. An Israeli does not say, no, thank you. They say, no. An Israeli does not say, I see your point, but I'd like to offer an alternative perspective. They say, you're wrong. And they mean it warmly. That's the part that takes foreigners years to understand. The argument is the relationship. The pushback is the affection. If an Israeli is arguing with you, they have decided you are worth arguing with. The moment they go polite and quiet is when you should actually worry. And they forget immediately. They forget arguments immediately. This is the other thing. You can have a screaming disagreement about a project, or you could feel like a bridge has been completely burned. And 6 months later, that same person is sending you referrals, calling to say hello. Because it was never personal. It was Tuesday. Now let's talk about the geography, because I think this is something else that diaspora Jews fundamentally misunderstand about what Israeli life feels like from the inside. Israel is tiny. I cannot stress this enough. From the northern tip of the Galilee to the southern tip of Eilat, it's about 470 kilometers. You can drive the entire country in 1 day. Americans, I need you to absorb this. That is smaller than many American states. And yet, inside this tiny geography, you have everything. We have mountains, desert, Mediterranean coast, the lowest point on earth, a freshwater lake up north, snow, actual snow, on the Hermon in winter, wildflowers in January, the Negev in summer, which is either beautiful or a punishment from God, depending on how you feel about the heat. We have all of it. In the spring now, the anemones come out. If you have never seen the anemones in the South, you don't know what I'm talking about. Suddenly, fields that were brown and dry are covered in a carpet of red and purple, and it looks like someone spilled an entire sunset on the ground. Israelis drive hours for this. 4 hours from one side of the country to the other. We take photos of wildflowers like other people take photos of their children, with equal love and less editing. Then we have the almond blossoms, the shkei, the first sign that winter might actually end. These white flowers on the trees, they appear before any leaves. Like the tree is so optimistic, it can't wait for logic to catch up. We track this, we post about it, we argue about whether this year's bloom was better than last year's. This relationship with the land is not metaphorical. It is literal. It is in the body. Israeli children, they grow up hiking. This is not optional. It's a school trip 4 times a year from first grade on. This is life. Every few months, you pile into a car, you drive up to some trail, and you walk. You walk up mountains, along rivers, through canyons, with waterfalls where the water is actually cold, and a swimming hole that's real that you can jump right in. Nachal Amud, Nachal Arugot, the Banyas, the Nachal Arbel. These are not tourist destinations. These are places we go to remember who we are. And yes, the traffic to get there is terrible. This is not negotiable. Every Israeli holiday weekend, the entire country simultaneously decides to go to the same 4 places. And the highway turns into a very long, very slow national meditation on patience, which Israelis are extraordinarily bad at. Then there's Eilat, at the very bottom, surrounded by the most beautiful coral reef you've ever seen, sitting at the crossroads of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, which is either a miracle of geography or a very specific kind of anxiety, depending on the news that week. And the Dead Sea, which is not a metaphor, but deserves to be one, you float. You have no choice. The salt content is so extreme that sinking takes genuine effort. And then you get a tiny cut on your finger that you forgot about, and the Dead Sea reminds you that it's there with a specific enthusiasm of 10,000 angry bees. It is at once the most relaxing and most violent body of water on the planet. Very Israeli, now that I think about it. I need to talk about October 7th, because I cannot talk about Israeli identity without talking about what happened to it on that day. There is a before and an after. Every Israeli knows exactly where they were. Every Israeli can tell you who they called first. And every Israeli, regardless of whether they are secular or religious, Ashkenazi or Sephardi, right or left, carries something new in their chest now. A weight that wasn't there before. A kind of knowledge you can't unknow. Here is something most people outside don't understand about Israeli society. We already knew loss. The army takes your children at 18. Every Israeli parent who has sent a kid to the army knows this. They know this particular prayer you don't say out loud. The one where you just ask for ordinary. Just bring them back ordinary. And then October 7th happened, and it wasn't soldiers. It was a music festival. It was kibbutzim. It was grandmothers and babies and families who went to sleep on a Friday night in October and did not come back. And the thing about Israeli grief is that it doesn't go private. The country's too small. Everyone knows someone. The degrees of separation collapse into 0. And then came the stickers. If you've driven through Israel in the last year and a half, you've seen them everywhere. On cars, on lampposts, on storefronts, faces, names. Return them home. Photographs of hostages. Children's drawings of yellow ribbons. Parents standing on corners with photos of their missing sons. This is Israeli. Not just the grief. Grief is universal. But the way it goes public, the way it plasters itself onto every surface of every inch of this country, the way it refuses to be quiet and invisible. We will not let you forget. We will not let you look away. The faces are on every highway until this is over. And even then, they will be somewhere else because this country does not forget its dead. It fuses us. The losses bond us in a way that I'm not sure any other society quite experiences. The funeral of a soldier you've never known, and half of the country wants to be there. There is something about shared danger and shared loss in a small geography that creates a communal nervous system where one part hurts and everyone feels it. And 200 days of reserve duty, which is what many Israeli men have served since October 7th, is not deployment. It's a second life. It's the same men leaving again and again, businesses collapsing, children learning not to ask when their father is coming home. And underneath every argument about drafts and about obligations and who carries what, underneath all of it is the arithmetic that doesn't negotiate. The army runs on bodies. And the question of who shows up is not theological, it's existential. Now let me tell you about the guns, because you need to understand the guns if you want to understand anything. If you're coming from somewhere with strict gun control, the first time you walk into a grocery store and you see someone standing with an M16 slung over their shoulder comparing yogurt options, you will feel something, I promise. Israeli children grow up with this. Not with violence, Tucker Carlson, but with guns. And it's a distinction that matters enormously. The gun is safety. The gun is the soldier coming home for Shabbat. The gun is not the threat. It's the answer to the threat. Every Israeli has served or knows people who served or will serve. The army is not an abstraction. It's your daughter, it's your son, your neighbor's kid. And then they come home for the weekend and eat your food and sleep until noon, and you make extra schnitzel and you don't ask anything difficult. And that's part of pretending. And that pretending is its own form of love. Let's take a breath about something lighter. The sunflower seeds. At some point in Israeli history, someone decided that the correct response to any form of waiting for a bus, a soccer game, a walk to shul, was to crack open a bag of sunflower seeds and eat them one at a time with your teeth, leaving a trail of shells wherever you go. This is a national practice. You can map Israeli gathering spots by the density of shells on the ground. And it's beautiful in its way. And the smoking, Israeli smoking culture, well, it's its own sociological phenomena. Israelis smoke at a rate that would alarm a cardiologist, but makes complete sense as a cultural technology. The cigarette is a permission for pausing. You're not lazy, you're smoking. It's a whole different category. Pair this with the coffee culture, espresso on a small table outside a cafe at any hour, and you get the rhythm of Israeli life. Very intense bursts of work, then a hard stop. Coffee, cigarettes, argue about something political, back to work. The argument, by the way, is never optional. And the food, this is important. In America, Jewish food is Ashkenazi by default. Matzah balls, bagels, brisket, the deli counter. It's Eastern European. It's Yiddish. It's your grandmother's kitchen in Brooklyn. In Israel, the default tilts Sephardi. The majority of secular Israelis eat kitniot on Pesach. The shuk smells like za'atar and cardamom and grilling meat. Shakshuka at 7 o'clock in the morning. That's not brunch, it's breakfast. Hummus is not a dip, it's a religion. And shawarma, falafel, and schnitzel all coexist on the same menu without anyone finding it strange. And then every holiday has its food, and every food is not negotiable. The sufganiyot, those Israeli Hanukkah donuts that are somehow better every year, filled with things that have no business being inside a donut, but they are anyway, they appear like a national holiday of fried dough, which is exactly what they are. The Hamantashen at Purim, the Seder plate at Pesach, which is the most universally observed Jewish ritual in Israel, across every denomination, because it's not a theology. It's the story of us. We were slaves, we left, and we are here. Now, I want to talk about the communities, because Israel is not one thing. There is Tel Aviv, which is, depending on who you ask, either the most progressive, cosmopolitan, urban center in the Middle East, with one of the largest pride celebrations in the world, where parties start at 2 a.m, and there's always people on the beach hanging out 24 hours a day. Or it's a secular bubble so removed from the rest of the country, it might as well be a different country, which some Tel Avivians would honestly prefer. It holds both. It's very Israeli that way. And then there is Jerusalem. Jerusalem, which is holy to 3 religions at the same time in the same square kilometer, which is either a miracle of coexistence or the most complicated real estate situation in human history. Probably both. On a regular Tuesday, you have ultra-Orthodox Jews and Arab shopkeepers and Christian pilgrims and secular tourists all moving through the same narrow alleys, which sound like the setup to a joke, but it's just Wednesday in the old city. Then there's Haifa, quietly doing its dignified thing up north, with its Baha'i gardens and its mixed Jewish and Arab neighborhoods, and its general attitude of, we've figured out coexistence, you're welcome, now please leave us alone to enjoy the view. And inside all of this, the Sephardi-Ashkenazi tension that never fully healed, the class wounds that go back generations, the secular Haredi friction that crackles constantly, the Arab-Jewish fault line that is simultaneously a daily reality and an impossibly complex moral question. The Russian immigrants, the Ethiopians, the Druze who serve in the army with a loyalty that should make every Israeli stop and think. The Bedouin, the Circassians. Israeli names are mostly gender neutral, which means every teacher keeps a second column in an attendance book just to know if the child is a boy or a girl. That detail, for some reason, says everything. and Greek Jews, Turkish Jews, Italian and Kurdish Jews, entire communities that don't fit neatly into the Ashkenazi Sephardi binary that American Jews used to organize everyone, who simply arrived with their own food and their own melodies and their own 1,000-year-old arguments and added them to the pile. And then there's the foreign workers, the Filipinos who care for Israelis' elderly with a patience and tenderness that quietly shames us sometimes. These South Asians in construction, people from every corner of the globe who came and are somehow woven into this thing now. And the cats. Israel has more cats than it has any rational explanation for. They sit on restaurant chairs. They walk through your legs at the shuk. They stare at you from archaeological ruins with the judgment of creatures who were here before the state and will outlast all of us. Nobody owns them. Everybody feeds them. They are the Israeli public. And here is something worth saying about the calendar, because the calendar is where the difference between being Jewish and being Israeli becomes most physical. In the diaspora, being Jewish means swimming against the current. The world around you is organized by a different year, a different rhythm, different holidays. You have to work to keep yours. You have to explain your holidays to your coworkers. You have to carve out the space. In Israel, you are Jewish by default. The calendar is Jewish. The country stops for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Hanukkah puts lights on every public street. Purim puts everyone in costume, including people who haven't been inside a synagogue since their bar mitzvah. Even secular Israelis who eat seafood and drive on Shabbat do something quiet on Yom Kippur. The road's empty, not because it's enforced, because the whole country shares the gravity of the day. And the holidays align with the seasons in a way that diaspora Jews never fully experience. Sukkot is autumn harvest. Tu B'Shvat is when the almond trees actually bloom. Shavuot is actual first fruit season. The calendar and the land are speaking the same language. The prayers for rain fall when you exactly need rain. When you say next year in Jerusalem at the Pesach Seder, and you live here, it just lands differently. Twice a year, the entire country stands completely still. Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron. Holocaust Remembrance Day and Memorial Day for fallen soldiers. A siren sounds and everything stops. Cars stop on the highways. People stand in the middle of intersections. Conversations mid-sentence. And you stand there in silence, in the street with everyone around you, and you feel the weight of what it costs to be here. No other country does this. No other people does this. And it's not morbid. It's the opposite of morbid. It's the acknowledgement that being here is not free, and we know the name of what it costs. Every public school in Israel has a ceremony for its alumni who were killed in service. Many of these schools were founded during the British Mandate. They have been commemorating their dead for decades. This is baked into what it means to grow up Israeli, not as trauma, but as inheritance, as responsibility. And then there's Hatikva, the national anthem, the hope, written by someone who wasn't sure the dream would ever happen. And you sing it at the end of a ceremony, at a sports event, at a graduation, and something moves in your chest that you can't entirely explain. 2,000 years of exile behind every note. The absurdity and the miracle of standing here in this place singing this in Hebrew. And it actually worked. The scholars called it Israeli Jewish culture versus Jewish Israeli culture. This distinction between the secular Hebrew identity that was built deliberately, consciously, out of Zionist ideology, and the revival of Hebrew, and the religious Jewish identity that came with its ancient infrastructure. And they're right that these are two different things. Two subcultures in constant negotiation, sometimes war, always conversation. But what they can't fully capture in academic language is what it feels like when both of these things live in the same body. When you're a secular Israeli who knows the Pesach Haggadah by heart, not because you're religious, but because it's yours. When you're a religious Israeli whose kids use Arabic slang and argue politics over Friday night dinner. When the lines blur, as they constantly do in this messy, living, unresolvable way that real culture always blurs. In Israel, the culture isn't one thing. It's Ishai Ribo and Hanan Ben-Ari, two religious artists who managed to break completely through the religious-secular divide and fill stadiums with people from every part of Israeli society singing together. It's Mimuna and breaking the Ramadan fast, celebrated over the same Arabic cuisine. It's the Arab nurse at Shari Tzedek telling you excitedly where she took shelter when the sirens went off because she was also scared. And this is her city too. It's complicated in ways that require you to actually live here to understand, and simple in ways that surprise you when you do. Here's the thing I want you to internalize as this episode winds down. Judaism, as practiced in Israel, is not more authentic than Judaism practiced elsewhere. I want to be clear about that. The diaspora created things that Israel never could. The Talmud, most of it. Entire traditions of learning and prayer shaped in conditions of exile. The Jewish people survived 2,000 years without a state, and that survival was not an accident. It was the product of a Judaism that could travel. But something happens here that can't happen anywhere else. The tradition meets the land it was always talking about. The prayer for rain means rain you can feel. The history isn't in a book. It's under your feet, literally, because you are constantly one shovel's depth from something ancient. The moral questions aren't abstract. They're Tuesday's news. And the Israeli, whatever else they are, is a Jew who doesn't have to explain themselves, who doesn't have to justify their holidays or their calendar or their need for a state, who can be fully, physically, loudly, imperfectly, beautifully Jewish just by waking up and going outside. There are real tensions here. The Haredi secular divide that sometimes turns violent, the Sephardi Ashkenazi wounds, the Arab Jewish complexity that nobody has solved and probably nobody ever will, because some things are not solvable. They're just negotiated generation by generation, street by street, in the shuk and on the bus, and in the emergency room where everyone is equal in front of the doctor. But even inside all the tension, there's something that I have never found anywhere else. The feeling that this particular argument is mine to have, that this particular land with its anemones and its cats and its terrible traffic and the Dead Sea and the almond trees and the Hanukkah lights strung between the lampposts and the stickers on every car asking you not to forget the dead. This belongs to me and I belong to it. Not because I conquered it, but because I came home. That's the moral edge of being Israeli. Not that everything is resolved, not that we figured it out, but that the Jewish question, who are we? What do we owe each other? How do we live? It stops being theoretical the moment you move here. It becomes the ground under your feet. And there's something clarifying about that, something that makes you finally feel irreversibly awake. If this episode gave you something, if it made you want to book a flight or call your Israeli cousin or just sit with the complexity of what it means to be a people with this particular history in this particular place, come find us at moraledge.com. Longer episodes, deeper conversations, topics that don't fit into a scroll and weren't meant to. We're building something for people who are done with the shouting and ready for the actual thinking. This is the Weekly Squeeze Breakdown of Moral Edge. I'm Chanale.